Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Between Sessions with Berries. I have an amazing guest today. She's so amazing, I couldn't think of everything I wanted to ask her in this short time. So I hope we can touch on everything. Her name is Janet Bayramyan. She's a licensed clinical social worker with multi-state licensure and over 8 years of experience specializing in trauma therapy. Drawing on her Russian, Armenian, and American heritage, she uses culturally informed, strength-based lens in her work with individuals and couples. Janet is certified in EMDR and brainspotting and trained in IFS levels 1 and 2. She's an expert in the havening techniques, which I really want to talk about, and attachment-focused EMDR. She helps clients deeply understand the impact of trauma on the nervous system and guides them toward healing through emotional regulation and interconnection. Janet, thank you so much for being here. If we could just dive in and maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background and how your multicultural identity influences your approach to therapy and how you work with clients. I'd love to talk about that.
I'm located in Los Angeles, so I'm born and raised Angelino. And as you mentioned through my bio, I do have Russian Armenian background. So I was born in LA, but I have immigrant parents. My mom is Russian, my dad is Armenian. So I grew up with both of the cultures as well as assimilating into, American culture, going to American school and things like that. And I think, how that influenced me is that, in my culture, I think unfortunately, mental health is not really talked about. I know the younger generations are really doing it, which I'm very proud of, and it's amazing. But in my parents' generation, this wasn't really a thing we talked about. I was always a sensitive person. I'm a sensitive person now. I was, always a sensitive child, what we now call a big feelings kid, right? And, I think my family didn't really know how to support me in certain ways. So as I grew up, I actually had to navigate and find mental health support myself. It started in high school, and then, I sought support in college, which was great. And I didn't necessarily at the time know that I wanted to be a clinician professionally, but it was always something that was sort of like in the back of my mind and something that, I decided to eventually pursue because there was no other really career path that really spoke to me that I was passionate about. And, when I did seek out therapy in college, it was amazing. It was wonderful. And I thought to myself, okay, like maybe I can do this. Maybe I can be this level of support for somebody as they're navigating different changes. So that's really what, brought me to my MSW program and really pursue this in a real way.
Amazing. And somewhere along the line, you decided trauma and kind of, it sounds like, started exploring a lot of different ways to help people with their trauma, help clients with their trauma. Can we talk about that a little bit? Because, some of the clinicians listening maybe are newer clinicians, or maybe they haven't delved into treating trauma as much as other people do. Why is just talking about trauma not always the first step to treating our clients that have trauma backgrounds? Because, you would think you come in, you talk about it, that's great, but really it's a misnomer, it's a myth. And I think a lot of, particularly even newer clinicians, don't even realize that in a lot of ways. So can we just talk about that? Like, why is that not the best idea?
Yeah.
Then we could dive into all these modalities that you do, because I just want to hear about everything.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It's a great question. So when we engage in any sort of talk therapy, I'll talk a little bit about the brain. So
Okay.
what comes online is our prefrontal cortex. So that's like the front brain. That's the, cognitive, very logical part of our brain. And when we talk about trauma, certainly we can gain insight. Certainly, when I talk with people about it in sessions, they know that what happened is not their fault. They know that, there was maybe a perpetrator out there or somebody that violated their rights. But talking about it, engaging the prefrontal cortex isn't necessarily going to make you feel better. You still might have, symptoms of PTSD, hyperarousal, anxiety, hypervigilance, fears, and things like that. And that's because, I'm quoting Bessel van der Kolk, his book, the body keeps the score. So much of trauma is stored in the body. So we need to actually access the deeper parts of our brain, our limbic system, our brainstem, because that's the emotional centers of our brain. When you talk about trauma and working with clients with trauma, they carry so much shame.
Yeah.
It wasn't my fault that, I'm bad, right?
Yeah.
And again, logically, we know that's not the case, but emotionally, so much of that is there. And talking about it isn't really going to change that. And furthermore, if clients don't necessarily have the capacity yet to regulate their nervous system, or if maybe they don't know how, they don't have those tools, talking about the incident or multiple incidents could actually re-traumatize them.
Yes.
So that's why, talk therapy, there's a place for it, absolutely, but it's not what's going to get the client to the place where they want to be.
And how quickly do you think when you start working with someone, are you like, okay, they're obviously getting re-traumatized right now. It's time to move from this like intake or this like just not chit chat, but just this like venting or processing of things to now we need some therapeutic trauma modalities. Like, how do you decide when to switch into that type of modality? Like, what are the signs you might see in a new client coming in that like, okay, talk therapy is not the modality we need to use here?
Well, for me, I tend to start bringing in my different interventions almost right away,
Mm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
first session when we are getting to know each other, when we are doing that assessment. But when I was a newer clinician, I didn't have those skills yet, the training yet. I
Yeah.
remember, seeing clients maybe like dissociate, right? Like they would check out a little bit. They would look in other directions and almost feel like they were not there anymore. Or I have clients, get highly activated in their body. They might tense up. They might almost like freeze, in the
Mm-hmm.
moment. And I used to work in an agency where there were clients that were, unfortunately had backgrounds with complex PTSD. So I would see a lot of that like frozen sense in their bodies.
Yeah.
Some other signs, high affect, like tearfulness, weeping, that kind of thing. So again, it's not necessarily bad, but we just, as clinicians, we want to support clients really in slowing down when we're starting to really process, and do some of that trauma work.
So what would be a couple of those early interventions, like right there in the beginning, if you're noticing the frozen or, the real a lot of affect, what would be a couple of like go-to tools for a clinician maybe that's newer in this or doesn't realize you need to use those tools in the beginning to start the regulation? What would be a couple just off the top of your head that you would go to in your practice?
Well, I typically tell clients, even when they first meet with me, that they don't have to tell me, everything right away. And I
Mm,
give permission for that because especially clients that have never done therapy before, they think that they have to just share everything in the first session. And, as we know, therapy is a process, it's a journey. And so I say that. What I also say to clients is that, you also don't have to trust me right away because I realize that trust, is earned and it's not given, especially for clients with history of trauma. Their trust has been shattered in people. So they don't have to trust me right away. And that actually helps clients feel like a sense of ease. The therapist isn't expecting, that from me. And then as far as some of those regulation techniques, I, I ask questions like, as you're talking about this, what do you notice in your body? Where do you notice
mhm.
if you might be holding tension? So getting clients to get to know their bodies a little bit better and some of the different sensations. I encourage some kind of mindfulness skills. So we might do some deep breathing, hey, can we slow down a little bit? Let's take a couple breaths together right now. And if they're really just, having flashbacks or shutting down, it's really important to bring clients to the present moment. So I'll just have them name different objects they see in the room just to get them grounded back into the present place. And once they do that, then we explore. So what happened there? What did you notice happen for you? Just so that they can start becoming aware of some of the different patterns and the ways that their body really tries to protect themselves.
Those are fantastic tips. Just amazing. Thank you. So let's get into these different modalities that you're trained in. Give us a little background. Where did you start? Was it EMDR and then brain spotting, then IFS? How did you like do that trajectory and what made you decide? And maybe we could talk a little bit like what are the differences? Because I know myself, I'm like, gosh, I'm already trained in EMDR myself. And I'm always like, gosh, should I bring on brain spotting as well or IFS? I see all these trainings and it's hard to decide really where to go with it, I think.
I know I'm like a training junkie. If it were up to me,
Yeah.
I would do a training every 2 months, but I know I have to slow down. Yeah. So
Love that.
yeah, I started with EMDR
Okay.
when I was an associate. One of my supervisors that supervised me at the time, she was EMDR trained, and it inspired me to really pursue it because I really learned from her again that when we have clients coming in with trauma, we need to do a little bit more. We need to
Hmm.
offer a little bit more for them. So I started, my training then through the EMDR Institute, and I fell in love with it right away. I thought it was amazing. And actually, one thing that I'll share about my story is I'm someone that before I even do a training, I try it myself first as a
Oh, I
client.
love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So my therapist at the time, thankfully, was also EMDR trained. So I said, okay, I want to try this and see what it's like. And, I kid you not, it was magical, to go through the
Yeah.
process and experience some of the shifts that I experienced. And I was also someone that didn't believe in it right away. I thought to myself, like, moving eyes back and forth is really gonna change you. I didn't understand until I really tried it.
Hmm. Yeah. I remember being an early clinician too, and I was so frustrated because I all I had in my toolbox was talk therapy, and I remember like searching for something because I was like, this can't be the only way to help these people. And the trauma just emerges in session a lot of times, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, this is not working. They're getting re-traumatized. And then when I found EMDR and went through the training, I was the exact same way. I was like, this is the missing piece that I never knew existed to help all of these clients. Like it was a miracle to me that it
Yes.
worked and it worked so well. So I
Yes.
just love that you said that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So EMDR, I still use it. I still offer it to my clients. A lot of my clients are really request it because EMDR is so mainstream right now.
Hmm.
But after a few years of EMDR, I'm the type of person that just gets curious about what else is out there, what additional modalities, could maybe be supportive. And a colleague actually, who is also EMDR certified, she's a consultant, she did a brain spotting training and she raved about it, you know.
Wow.
And at the time, I was again kind of searching for something, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next. And so, okay, so I got curious and again, I went back to my therapist. Can we do a brain spotting session so I can try it out and see, how I feel about it? And same thing, it was, quite amazing and quite, again, I was skeptical. I was like, how is looking at a particular spot in the room or on the screen going to make a difference? But it really did. It really
Hmm.
helped me tap into a deeper place in my subconscious. So then I did my brain spotting training. Brain spotting, I became a brain spotting certified therapist and also a consultant because I really believe in it. So I'm happy to go into it, and share a little bit more about how these therapies work.
Yeah, I think it'd be really great to hear the difference even between EMDR and brain spotting because they're similar, right? It's looking and processing and that sort of thing. Do you find that one's more effective? Does it just depend on the client? Like, and how do you decide I'm going to use EMDR over brain spotting with this client? I'd love to talk about that a little bit for anybody that's
Yeah,
listening.
yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with what they are, and then I can go into, how I use it with my clients when I decide, what to
Okay.
use. So EMDR, I think a lot of people have heard of it, stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, developed by Dr. Francine Shapiro. She's unfortunately not with us, but such a pioneer, in our world, in the trauma world. And, I remember in my initial EMDR training, they actually talked about the story of how Francine Shapiro, developed it. But, she started off as a researcher. She's a psychologist. And I think they talked about how she was actually, maybe dealing with her own distress in her life and somehow kind of fell into this by trying to move her eyes back and forth to see, what that would mean or what that would look like. And instantly she felt almost a little bit more regulated in her body and in her system. And so she got curious about it and essentially developed this model. And so when we talk about eye movements back and forth, we're talking about what's called bilateral stimulation, where we're connecting left brain, right brain with one another to process a particular traumatic event. In EMDR, we call it a target memory. And so how I explain it to clients is essentially we're almost like mimicking the process that happens in REM sleep. When we're in REM sleep, and that's kind of that deep place, of sleep, our eyes move back and forth underneath our eyelids. And how I explain that to clients is that's when our brain sort of clears any sort of clutter. That's when we might have dreams. That's when our brain tries to kind of clean things up in there. So we're trying to essentially mimic that so that we can go to a deeper place in our subconscious and our consciousness to be able to process memories. Because again, when we talk about things, we talk about it, right? But we're not necessarily connecting to our body experience. And we might carry certain beliefs. We might carry certain, physical sensations that maybe in our conscious mind, we're not aware that are even there. With EMDR, through the facilitation of, an EMDR trained therapist, we move into that deeper place in our brain, our limbic system, and we try to really reprocess, what the particular memory is that you want to work on so that you can come to maybe either a place of neutrality, or when you think about the memory, you don't, have those PTSD moments. You don't feel, that high affect anymore. And I also say, with trauma work, a lot of it is making meaning from the experience. So I don't know, and you're trained in EMDR, so I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, it's an amazing explanation, and just that, making meaning of it. And it was hard for me in the beginning with it because the clinician is stepped out of the process. Like, we're not interjecting like connections, or trying not to unless they get stuck.
Yes.
But I always, because in my mind, it's like, oh, it's probably connected to this that they talked about when they were, sharing the story. With, like, I always think there's certain connections, but it never ceases to amaze me with EMDR. It's like, they'll say, oh, that's connected to this one time when I was here, and then this. And it's like nothing a clinician could ever do for the client. It's just like, it's the beauty of your own mind, and being able to make those own connections is the healing part of it, and the desensitization part of it. It's like, once you get it
Yep.
internally in that processing, it just like clears it, which is amazing to me. And it's nothing talk therapy could ever do, So yeah, it's an amazing process.
I agree. That's EMDR. It's, I love it. It's amazing. And I know in my bio, you mentioned attachment focused EMDR. So I really also enjoy that. I learned, the Laurel Parnell model. She's the one that attachment focused EMDR. I found that, protocol to be really wonderful work with clients as well.
That's what I need to go down the rabbit hole with to learn more about that.
Highly recommend. Yeah.
Amazing. Now, brain spotting. So can we talk about brain spotting a little bit? Because I too love to try these with my own therapist, and I've done brain spotting and EMDR and a couple of other things, but it's similar but different. So could you talk a little bit about brain spotting and what that is?
Yeah. So brain spotting was developed by also a psychologist, David Grand. I can share the story of David Grand also. He was actually an EMDR therapist. He was an EMDR practitioner in his office. And his population that he enjoys working with are athletes that want to, improve their performance, athletes that maybe need to work through traumatic memories with injuries and stuff like that. And so David was working with an ice skater, a figure skater, and this particular figure skater, she kept on falling in her triple axis. And so he was doing the back and forth eye movements with her in one session, and somehow spontaneously her eye movements just stopped and focused on a particular spot. David Grand had the wherewithal and the foresight to not interrupt the process. So he was just like, okay, I'm going to go with it. And he noticed that for this particular client, as she was focused on the spot, her body was maybe making a little bit of movements. There was maybe tension release that was coming out. And so he just allowed for the remaining session to allow whatever needed to come forward to come forward. And then when she came back into session the following week and he processed, what happened for her, she basically explained that she just felt like something was coming out of her, something was released, tension was released, and the fear of falling was released. And in fact, she was able to do the triple, movement and not fall anymore, which
Oh
was
my gosh.
quite remarkable. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So essentially, there came the birth, of brain spotting. So the idea behind brain spotting is that where you look impacts how you feel. And it's very interesting because if you think about it, when we are meeting with clients, as they're talking about things, they do look in particular.
Yeah. They'll look up or like down.
Mhm.
Yep. Hmm.
Exactly. So certain spots, which in brain spotting we call brain spots, might actually bring up a lot of activation for us. So when we look at a particular spot, we might be actually processing through perhaps a trauma memory or a distressing, event as we look at a particular spot. Or another spot can be what we call maybe very resourcing, maybe very calming. So if you're working through something and you need to move to a more calm place, you might be able to, look at a resource spot. So I'm kind of simplifying it, but it's essentially with brain spotting, you're helping clients also process trauma, process distressing life memories, but instead of them having the eye movements back and forth or doing the bilateral stimulation, they're getting bilateral stimulation through the bilateral sounds. We have clients earphones with the bilateral sounds, but the client is focusing with your therapist on, as you think about that memory, where on the screen or where in the room do you feel most activated? You find the spot, you focus on the spot. When you do that, your brain moves again into the subcortical part of your brain, to that deeper part of your brain, to then process what's happening. And the processing can be anything. It can be core beliefs coming forward, it can be other memories coming forward. Something spiritual for you could come forward. It could be, a meaningful experience like that. It could really be anything. And we say in brain spotting, the client's brain is the expert in the room. So
Mm.
similar to EMDR, we're not kind of jumping in, we're just allowing the client to have their process. And I have found brain spotting to be a very, very gentle way to process. So if we're talking about the difference between EMDR and brain spotting, with EMDR, there are 8 phases and you need to do a lot of preparation with
Right.
clients. With brain spotting, there's really virtually no preparation other than, probably your intake and assessment and just talking about brain spotting with them. And then you can essentially jump right into it.
Mm.
And with EMDR, sometimes people might notice that the next day they feel tired or fatigued. Brain spotting there can certainly have that too. However, again, I found it to be a gentler way to process.
Mm.
So
Mm.
when you ask me, how do you pick, one or the
Yeah.
other? It really depends. I mean, I have clients that, are adamant they want to try EMDR, they request it, and I say, sure, absolutely, let's do
Hmm.
EMDR. But if there's a client with, complex PTSD or just a lot of history of, different life events and challenges, I may suggest brain spotting because, again, it's just a little bit more gentle.
Yeah. Even in my own experience, I remember that. I also remember thinking, like, can this be working? It's so simple, you know,
Mhm.
just look at
Mhm.
the spot and whatever comes up and keep staring, you know, that kind of thing. And I remember thinking it was so simple, but it did. I mean, it did help me. So I did feel a difference after I did it. So it's two amazing modalities. Yeah.
Yeah.
And EMDR is way more complicated. It is. I mean, there's all these like phases and preparation and you know, you got
Mhm.
to go remember to go back to the target. You got to rate things on scales and
Mhm.
brain
Mhm.
spotting did seem just a lot easier, maybe for the clinician even, you know?
Yes, yes, there isn't as much of sort of that protocol and process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. I love this deep dive just so people can understand it a little bit better.
Yeah.
So we've got IFS, and then you also talked about havening technique. I don't know if that goes with IFS or one of these other modalities, but I've never heard that term before. So I thought it would be interesting for the listeners to know what
Yeah.
that is.
The havening
Okay.
technique was developed by Dr. Ronald Rudin out of the
Okay.
UK, actually. If you all are in Los Angeles, the havening expert here is Dr. Kate Truitt, who does a lot of the trainings. So I did her training as well, similar around the time that I did EMDR training. And so similar to all these other modalities that I'm talking about, it is not a talk therapy. It is a psychosensory modality. So,
Okay.
what Dr. Rudin found is that there's a particular type of touch that can help clients better regulate their nervous system, process trauma, and not even just process trauma, it can be used to help manage anxiety, panic attacks, different issues, maybe even sleep issues. And it's a way to better, learn how to better regulate your body, regulate your nervous system. So you can see me on screen here, Kim. So essentially, it's basically touching above your forehead, underneath your eyelids, giving yourself a nice hug, moving your hands through your arms and to your forearms and to, the palms of your hands, and essentially repeating this process as the client is maybe reliving or talking about the traumatic event. And what we call this is called the havening touch. And what this havening touch does is it produces what we call delta waves in the body. And the delta waves are the waves that come up when we're sort of in our most relaxed state, typically when we're sleeping, dreaming. And so, again, we're mimicking that process that happens with sleep. So, it's not a necessarily bilateral stimulation, bilateral back and forth, but it's a way for the clinician to teach the client how to regulate the body using this touch and also process, the trauma, the distressing life event, or just, whatever issue is coming up for them, like anxiety, like maybe a panic. And I really like this as well because it's something that I think is very tangible for clients. Like if they just learn how to use this type of touch, they can do it anytime in their own life.
Wow.
I don't have to be there. Therapy is essentially only really 1 hour a week, but
Hmm.
the client can use this before bedtime when they wake up. If they're maybe at work and they're stressed out, they can step away and try this and just see how it makes them feel and see if it's helpful for them to regulate their body and their nervous system. So I really like it for that. And I think it's really powerful too.
Oh, gosh, it's amazing. You have such a robust toolbox. Even the IFS, I mean, we haven't even touched on that much, but IFS 1 and 2,
Hmm.
IFS is about identifying your parts, right? And then is there a nervous system regulation that goes along with IFS 2 with all of these different modalities, or is that totally a different direction you would go with a client?
Well, I would say so. So with IFS developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz, and the model is essentially helping our clients get to know a lot of their different parts. So how I explain it to people is, we have clients with anxiety, right? And they so over identify with anxiety. They'll come to session and they'll say, I'm just an anxious person. This is who I am, right? But
Yeah.
in IFS, that's not true. In IFS, the way that we think about it is you just have an overactive, anxious part that you are often very blended with, but that is not all of who you are. So the core belief when we think about through the IFS model is that we are all born with what they call the 8 C's: compassion, curiosity, courage, clarity, calmness, right?
Mm.
We are all born with that. However, when we go through life, we go through different experiences that unfortunately, require us then to have different parts of ourselves to protect us. Parts can also carry certain burdens. Certain burdens are carried because of different life experiences. So
Mhm.
with IFS, we're helping our clients get to know their parts, support their parts, but also get them connected back to their 8 C's. And the eight
Mm.
C's in IFS, we call it self energy.
Mm.
We help them get back to their own self energy because every client has that. They just are not aware of it, and they haven't been connected to it for a long
Yeah.
time. So when we can help our clients connect to their own self energy, it's amazing to see what happens in their body, their nervous system. They can actually breathe oftentimes a little bit easier. So that's really, again, I'm simplifying it, but that's really
Sure.
what a lot of the IFS work is. And if we're talking to clinicians here, I also let them know that, you can also combine IFS with EMDR, combine IFS with brain spotting. I do it all the time, and it's amazing.
Mhm. Yeah, hearing you talk, my clinical brain is thinking, okay, yeah, because I've had the EMDR client that stops and stares somewhere like in the middle of the bilateral stimulation, and that's the perfect opportunity to just say stare and go with it if
Hmm.
you're brain spotting trained, and then
Hmm.
to be able to like process maybe some parts, what parts are coming up. Like I could just see how this is such a robust toolbox to be able to just shift between all these modalities now that you're trained at all of them. That it's must be amazing to work with you is what I'm thinking as you're talking, really.
Yeah, thank
Um,
you. I hope so.
Yes, absolutely. So, what would you say to a clinician that's listening to this and is like, oh my gosh, now I got to do EMDR, brain spotting, IFS, havening, like I've got to learn all these techniques? Would you have like a technique that you would recommend would just be a good place to start? Or is it, each clinician's different and the type of modality they want to do? Like, what recommendations would you have?
The first recommendation that I would have to a clinician is if there's a model that you are curious about and that you're interested in, but you're just not sure if it's maybe the right fit for you or something that, you necessarily want to commit to just yet. I just recommend finding a therapist trained or certified in these models and let
Mm.
them know, I'm a therapist. Let's say I'm interested in EMDR, but I'm a little bit concerned. It's expensive to do the training, so I don't know about it, right? So I say to clinicians, find somebody who can maybe facilitate this model for you, and you can be the
Mhm.
client. And then just see how it resonates, see how you feel. Did it make a difference for you? Was it something that you felt changed, after those
Yeah,
sessions? I think if you do that, then you will feel a little bit, I would say, more comfortable maybe spending the money. It's a lot of money to do these trainings.
it really is. Yeah.
Yeah, spending the money to do it, because then at least you have your personal experience that you can go off of and say, okay, like this really made a difference for me. So, I want to offer this in my practice, right?
Hmm.
So I will say start there, really start there.
That's such good advice.
Every single model that I've, trained in, I've always asked my therapist to facilitate it first before I, went through with it. If a model, maybe doesn't really speak to you, then, maybe it's not the right fit for you, right? Like there are certain models that I know therapists swear by, but it doesn't necessarily, I would say, work for me, and that's okay.
Hmm.
There's so many models out there to work with trauma. With IFS, IFS is something where it's a whole process. So I don't know if maybe one
Right.
session is going to show you what IFS is like, but you can probably do several sessions with an IFS therapist just to see how it feels. With IFS, though, I'm sure a lot of you have, seen this, but you have to go through the institute, and there's a
Right.
whole
I've heard
process
it's
behind it.
very involved.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very involved, exactly. So even with IFS, you can just put yourself on the wait list and just try out the model and see what it's like, and hopefully you'll get the emails to sign up for the trainings.
Hmm.
But yeah, I would say try it first before you fully commit to it.
Yeah. That is wonderful advice. It really is because, like we said, I mean, all of the trainings based on my research and doing the EMDR, it's super expensive. And then you've got supervision, and then to get certified, there's a whole nother level to that. And it's a big investment. So I think that's just brilliant.
Yeah.
Go try it out and see what works best for you. Because I do
Yes.
feel like we tend to do better work with things that we really deeply believe in and have been transformative for ourselves also. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
I would say too, because again, I've been in private practice, for the last 6 years. I've been licensed for the last 6 years. That's right. And I fall into this trap too. I feel like I see so many seasoned clinicians out there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they have, so many trainings and so many, robust backgrounds and different things. And I think to myself, I have to do all of that. But I remind myself, I have my entire career to
Yeah.
get these trainings. So I also don't want, I have these robust trainings myself, and I don't want clinicians that are listening to think, okay,
Hmm.
now I have to do all these 3 or 4 trainings. Start with one, get really
Yeah.
good at it, get really comfortable with it. And then if you want to add on in the next few years, you can, because you have your entire career to do so many different trainings, and you'll need the CEs anyway for your license, right?
Right.
So
Hmm.
might as well like take your time with a lot of these
Yeah,
trainings.
I love that. Yeah, take your time with it. And any clinician can get trained in like or learn about nervous system regulation or,
Mhm.
grounding techniques, mindfulness techniques, the things you were talking about in the beginning, if they are running up against, clients that are coming in with trauma, because everybody's got trauma, coming in, there are some things you can do in the beginning for free, that maybe don't require these long certifications and everything that can still help your clients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So do you do consulting, or do you just love to come on and talk about these different modalities and share with people?
Both, I would say.
Okay.
For brain spotting, I am a certified consultant. So if there are,
Oh, nice.
clinicians that are training in brain spotting that need support through their certifications or just need periodic consultations, I can offer that. And I think my approach is a little bit unique because, like I said, I combine the different modalities together. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily get that in the original phase 1 and phase 2 trainings of brain spotting.
Hmm.
And then for IFS, it's my goal to get certified. I'm not there yet, but
Yeah.
hopefully, throughout my career, I will work on that. But I really enjoy mentorship. I do supervise, pre-licensed clinicians that are working towards their
Nice.
hours. So I do bring in a lot of these models and these different approaches to, the clinical work that they're doing with their clients too.
Yeah, and you're licensed in multiple states, so I'm guessing you can help pre-licensed clinicians in many states, many
Yeah.
different locations.
Yeah.
California, Florida, South Carolina, Texas, Connecticut, and North Carolina.
Yeah. And Nevada too.
In
Yes.
Nevada. Oh, okay. Nice. That's
Mhm.
amazing. Well, how do people find you if they want to talk to you?
Yeah, so my practice is called Road to Wellness Therapy. So you can find my website, www.road, the number 2wellness.co. And then I am also on social media. I'm on Instagram at Therapy with Janet B. So you can also find me there. I love to share content on my Instagram, different, mental health and different topics on there. So that's another good way to connect with me too.
Thanks for taking the time today.